Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. MaryCariola.org. And the Highlands at Pittsford, an independent and assisted living community affiliated with the University of Rochester, offering cottage and apartment homes, daily life enrichment activities, and care assistance as needed. More at highlandsatpittsford.org.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made with a woman named Lauren on the day she graduates from high school, on a day usually marked by celebration. Lauren is kicked out of the house by her foster mother. She walks away from everything she knows with just the clothing on her back, 2 garbage bags of her things, nowhere to go. Eventually, Lauren finds a homeless encampment and connects with other unhoused people who will become her chosen family. They include a boy who has left home to escape his family's abuse. Another is a gambling addict who comes to the camp with his own complicated background. While the story I'm telling you is fictional, it is inspired by true events, and it's the focus of a new film called No Address, which hits theaters on Friday. The filmmakers want audiences to know that anyone can find themselves navigating homelessness. They hope that we can all approach conversations about homelessness with more empathy, more understanding. The local nonprofits PCHO, Person-Centered Housing Options, and the Housing Council are hosting an event tied to this film, and representatives from both organizations are here this hour talking about the state of homelessness in the region, maybe what we misunderstand about how people become homeless, and how they think we should end the crisis. I also understand we've been hearing from listeners on just about every issue that we've covered in the last month are federal cuts or what's going on in the federal government affecting local organizations and local efforts. We'll talk about that too. So a lot to cover. Let me welcome to the program Chuck Albanese, who's co-founder and CEO of PCHO. That's Person-Centered Housing Options. Welcome to the program. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And sitting next to Chuck is Nick Coulter, the co-founder, executive vice president, chief of development and community engagement at PCHO. Nick, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
And welcome to Mary Leo, who is executive director of the Housing Council at Pathstone. Thank you for being here as well.
Thank you.
The event that we talked about, it is a sold-out screening tomorrow. The event starts at 5 o'clock, so it's happened at AMC in Webster on Empire Boulevard, but already a lot of interest in this, so I don't want you to just show up there and cause a fire hazard. It's a lot going on. But we will also make sure that you know if you want to have a chance to see this film and you can't go tomorrow, you ought to have a chance to do it because I know it's something that really matters to all 3 of our guests here. I mean, Nick, the fact that it's sold out, people are concerned about this issue, huh?
Yeah, very much so. Well, we have a lot of support in the community, both from donors and folks that are in other organizations that are really trying to share that this is a big issue, that we need, everybody deserves a home, and that we all need to take it seriously.
I mean, this is a film that has a pretty high wattage cast. People like Ashanti, Beverly D'Angelo, Ty Pennington. Those are some of the names that pop to me. And, you know, Chuck, I guess I'm just curious to know if you feel like this is an indication that maybe at this moment this community is a little more engaged than we typically are about homelessness. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I really hope so. The scenarios that the film depicts really encompasses the folks that we see. The different examples, there's always some trauma behind the person's situation. And this film really, I think, brings that to light. And, you know, a lot of people have different views on homelessness, but hopefully this will give folks a different perspective.
Mary, what is at top of mind for you at the Housing Council at Pathstone? I know your organization's a little different here, but you partner with organizations like PCHO. What are you seeing in our community right now?
Well, for the Housing Council, we're a HUD-certified 501c3. We provide HUD-certified housing counselors to the community. We provide that in terms of workshops. So we saw just over 600 families attend either a tenant education workshop where we go over rights and responsibilities, best practices to maintain positive tenancy, how to find a great apartment. A lot of that course revolves around how to select an affordable and high-quality apartment. That's becoming a bigger and bigger challenge for families.
Just harder to find it?
Just harder to find it. And then conversely, we also offer a first-time homebuyer program because a lot of people are feeling that pinch in the rental market. And they assume, because Rochester has had a wonderful reputation of being an affordable place to live for a long time, that they would rather get into homeownership than be paying these high rents. And that goalpost is moving on families. So our folks seeing us totals about 1,200 families a year, either in a workshop or a one-on-one situation, are really struggling to just find something of quality that they can afford. So the distance between being housed and being unhoused is shrinking for a lot of our families in our community.
This is not at all my expertise, so I want to ask you a little bit about something that comes to mind for me when you describe that pinch and the challenge of finding something affordable, something that's available. This is a community that in my 23 years here in Rochester, I've seen a lot of market rate apartment complexes, a lot of higher end, a lot of luxury apartments, maybe less so at lower levels of price and income. And when I look at other communities, we often talk about stories like Austin, Texas, and different communities that have really kind of taken away any barriers to build more. I'm starting to hear more people on all sides of the aisle, starting with President Obama at the DNC last year, saying we need to build more. We need to find ways in every city and every community to stop anything that inhibits building more, so we can have higher supply, lower prices, more availability. Is it that simple? I mean, how do you see the issue?
I think we're in a perfect storm. So ever since 2009, 2008, the recession, we've been in a steady decline of building. So we have not been keeping up with the demand for over 20 years. That is meeting a point in our community where we're forming more households, but fewer people are in each household. So we have more people living either on their own or maybe just as a couple, and we're not forming as many households as we used to. So we have more people living differently than we had when our housing stock was developed. Our housing stock is aging. So there's a lot of competing factors. We also have our largest two populations are boomers, our seniors who want to stay in their homes for a lot longer, and they're competing with millennials and Gen X who want to get into homeownership for the first time, and those are our two, by population, largest demographics. So we have more people competing for less properties, and we haven't been building to keep up with those demands. So there's a lot of kind of perfect storm factors happening right now, making this a very difficult issue.
So what's one either policy or government action step that you would love to see taken?
Yeah, I know that our city of Rochester is going through looking at rezoning. I would encourage the other towns and villages to do the same, to be more inclusive. We need to be more creative and build to the way people want to live now and not just build what we've always had. It's very expensive. Just the hard costs of building apartments, like multifamily or single-family homes, are not keeping up with people's affordability and what they're bringing home. So it's just not a smart way. We can't keep doing what we've been doing and expect a new outcome. So I'd really hope to see more creative solutions in terms of how we house people, what we offer to the community. And to go back to your original point around what is being built, I think people are also confused that some of the new construction they are seeing is affordable. It just looks better than it had before. So some of the things that we're seeing go up in our city are mixed income or affordable housing. It just looks fancy. So I think people have judgments about what's going on in the city and make assumptions, but there is a lot of positivity.
Well, you heard Chuck mention that if you want to really understand what's going on with homelessness, it's important to understand that in the vast majority of cases, there's some kind of trauma that has happened. I'm looking at some data from PCHO. So from your 2024 street outreach report, you served 431 people, 94 were kids. 70% of people experience a disability of some kind, and that's a wide range, but 70% have a disability of some kind, and 30% experience domestic violence. In that group, 83% obtained housing of some kind, Nick, is that right?
That's correct. Our outreach team does an amazing job out on the street engaging people, from people living out of their cars, working jobs, to families with their kids in their cars, to folks living in encampments. It says 70% of people are expressing that they have a disability. That means that there's a portion of that population that can also work, that may be currently working when we find them and can't put together the finances to find an apartment like Mary described. So we work really closely with folks. We engage them quickly. And then we really just focus on housing. Yes, health services are important. Chuck can talk more about the need for that, but at the end of the day, if we don't get a roof over someone's house or somebody's head, and we really don't focus on helping them to survive and stay safe, we're not going to be as successful. So 83% of everybody we serve will get housing. A portion of that, a very small portion of that, will go into shelter. People struggle with the idea of going into shelter and living in a congregate setting. So most of the time, people will live in their cars until they can get into housing. They'll stay from place to place. And so we just walk that line with them.
But Nick and Chuck, looking at your report here, so we just talked about the street outreach component. In the housing data report, there's an interesting number as well that I want to understand better. I think there's an idea that skeptics have that, okay, you worked with 431 people in street outreach. 83% obtained housing. But the skeptics say they're not going to keep it. Either they end up in a shelter, they end up back on the street, or they're dealing with substance abuse, they don't get the help they need, they end up back on the street, or they get some kind of short-term housing, they can't afford it, they end up back on the street. I'm looking at your 2024 housing data report, and it says 90 to 95% of people you served here stay housed?
Yep.
I mean, that's a very high number, and it's real?
Yeah. So
I'm not trying to be cynical.
No, you're good.
It's okay. It's real.
So the majority of our funding comes from HUD, which is another topic at some point. But we get audited by HUD, and HUD comes out and looks at our stick rate. So according to HUD, the stick rate is a person that's housed for a year or more.
Stick rate.
Stick rate.
Like
That's
the housing sticks.
That's their term, not ours.
Okay, yeah.
But the person stays housed for a year or more. So our current stick rate has been 90 to 95%. As the time goes on, it might decrease a little at the 2-year mark, 3-year mark, 4-year mark. But we really have a high success rate of folks staying in our housing.
Why?
Well, when we first created PCHO, an important part of the construction of PCHO was really to provide that support services component. When we first started formulating PCHO back between 2010 and 2013-14, there were housing programs out there. One was Shelter Plus Care. Shelter Plus Care provided a rental subsidy for the person, but not the case management component. And, Nick and I knew that these folks were traumatized. They don't, just because you find an apartment for the person and put them in there doesn't mean they're going to be successful. They have a lot of challenges that they're dealing with. So as we built PCHO, we built the support services component into the HUD grant that we applied for. So not only does the HUD program provide rental subsidy for the individual or families, it provides a dedicated case manager who will work with that person at a minimum on a monthly basis on whatever challenges that they have. So that has proven to be very successful. In addition to that, we also created a health home program for folks that are eligible to provide that extra support component to that. So I think our focus on the trauma piece and really treating individuals as individuals, it's, just because this person might be the same age and gender as this other person doesn't mean the approach is going to stay the same. So it's very important not to have a cookie cutter approach, but more of an individual approach, which takes time. So, but really, I think it's paid off for us in the long run and the individuals.
So let me ask all three of our guests then, if what's happening in Washington affects you right now, or you expect it to affect you in the near future. So I'll start with you, Nick. What are you seeing in Washington?
Yeah, it's definitely affecting us.
In what way?
We are part of national groups that navigate these issues. The National Alliance to End Homelessness, the National Institution of Homelessness Law. And these groups are reporting to us HUD cuts that they are seeing come down. Let me give you an example of how that's going to impact us. So right now, yes, we could continue to have our funding. There was the federal pause for, we were unable to pay landlords for a few days timely at the beginning of February. So that really affects our relationships with landlords that are expecting us to pay subsidies. When those landlords are unsure about whether or not we're going to be able to draw money down from HUD on a monthly basis to pay those rents, to pay our staff, to pay health care. They start thinking about ways to get their needs met in different ways. That means that landlords may back out of contracts. They may decide they don't want to work with HUD-funded programs, and that puts us directly at risk. So that's one example. When we lose HUD staff, which is at the federal level, our Buffalo office our HUD Buffalo office now has to scramble to find people to execute our contracts. And if those contracts are delayed and we end up delaying payments and they can't audit us properly and they can't make sure that we do our job properly, the data suffers, the financial process suffers, our drawdowns suffer, our community suffers. And we have to navigate all of that as agencies that are HUD funded. So it's really important for the listeners to understand that, some of these sweeping decisions, while some people may be good or may be okay with efficiencies, we want efficient work. I can tell you 100% that we spend down our money and we do it diligently. It's important to understand that when we cut staff at the federal level, it affects how we do our job and how we pay our staff and how those families maintain housing.
So when that landlord is now feeling the uncertainty, someone who had been homeless, who maybe with your help and with some federal help has a place, is now possibly facing homelessness again?
True. So let's say a lease, they don't want to continue that lease. We have to find another landlord to continue that lease, and we have to work with that client to move them. As Mary so eloquently described, the housing market is becoming tighter and tighter. So where do we find that nice apartment for that person that lived in Webster or Penfield or Brighton or the city? We have housing units all over Monroe County, from Brockport to Pittsford. So when they start tightening those reins, we have to resort to less and less options.
Are you already seeing anybody who, as a result of what's happening at the federal level, has lost housing?
No.
Not yet.
No.
Do you think that's something that could happen soon?
We have to prepare for it if these delays continue.
Okay. Chuck, do you want to describe what you're seeing from Washington and possible impacts?
Yeah, I don't want to repeat what Nick said, but it's definitely those 3 days where our funding was frozen. It was very stressful, obviously, and it's important to really understand that the funding that comes to us not only obviously assists hundreds of homeless individuals on an annual basis, but we employ people, like Nick said. We're not a huge employer, but we do employ folks, but also the landlord relationship, which Nick kind of referenced. A lot of the funding that comes in our community through our program goes right back into the community. So if, through the infinite wisdom of the current administration, decides to cut our federal funding, that's $2.5 million that not only impacts individuals that are housed that will now become homeless, it impacts the staff that we have, and then impacts our community. The landlords are going to lose that revenue. It really does not make any sense, literally. But hopefully, it won't come to that. But we're in an unknown time.
Mary Leo, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the original question is what is happening at Washington affecting the three of us? And I would say it's affecting everybody, because one weakness, I think, of nonprofits in general is that we're so busy doing the work and making sure we're adhering to the federal requirements and all of the other due diligences we have to be good stewards of the investment our community is graciously putting into us, that we don't get the opportunity to tell the story effectively of how an investment in us is improving the quality of life of everybody. Just because you may not have needed to interact with PCHO or their team or the wonderful outreach that's happening your life is improved and is better because that outreach team is out there, because there's somebody for the folks on the streets to engage with and get those services. Because I don't think anybody enjoys feeling unsafe in their neighborhood, witnessing injustices or people being treated unfairly, or the harm that comes and the trauma that comes with being unhoused. Conversely, what we do at the Housing Council, we are a direct recipient of HUD funds. We use that money to help make sure that everybody is aware of their rights and responsibilities, both as a tenant and as a housing provider. Because there's a lot of frustration interacting with the court system on how do I properly evict a person? How do I know if I'm being discriminated against? How do I know if my neighbor could be doing X, Y, and Z? So investing in us so we could, quite frankly, cheaply share that information with the community is a cost reduction to the outcomes of the community not having that information. So efficiency isn't just about cutting costs. It's about calculating what the impact would be if those services go away. So I hope we don't experience what the costs could be, because I don't think anybody at this table can truly calculate what those costs would be, but it would be a quick civics lesson in what DC provides and the federal government provides to us locally if we all get the lights turned off immediately. For us, one of our biggest programs is our foreclosure prevention program. For free, I can assist anybody in Monroe County and even beyond to deal with their lender or their property tax issues, to make sure we keep them in their home so they don't become, lose their home to foreclosure, lose that equity, lose that property tax that's going into our community. And you as their neighbor, you don't lose property value. So by giving us a few $1,000s a year to make sure that a trained advocate is assisting that homeowner, your property value is staying intact. So it's not just a cost of saying, let's X out some budgets completely to save the federal government money. There's going to be costs to taking those investments out of our community.
Listeners have some questions related to some of the themes that are being discussed here by our guest. You're hearing Mary Leo, Executive Director of the Housing Council at Pathstone. Chuck Albany is his co-founder and CEO of Person-Centered Housing Options, and Nick Coulter is co-founder and Executive Vice President, Chief of Development and Community Engagement at PCHO. Alex emails to say, the new Health Equity Reform Medicaid waiver provides, in theory, huge opportunities to help protect the most at-risk from homelessness and further institutionalization, such as incarceration, cycling through emergency room stays, or involuntary inpatient, per Governor Hochul's new provisions. But it's only a demonstration waiver, and we've got a cut-happy federal administration barring any surprise changes. How are community-based organizations using this time to future-proof their budgets and demonstrate the overwhelmingly net good aspects of person-first housing programs? That is from Alex. Chuck, do you want to start on that one?
It's a big one.
That's a loaded question. To safeguard, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure there's a real safeguard in the environment that we're in. We certainly on a daily basis are exploring different options as far as different funding sources. As Mary talked about, we count our pennies to make sure, A, we spend them correctly, but also we have enough to go around. I'm going to toss this to Nick because
from a development standpoint and sustainability standpoint, my job is that all day long is to think about strategies and ways to future-proof, as the emailer said, our work. So if federal funds are slowly stripped away, we are looking at ways to advocate with our state senators and legislators to build into the New York State budget alternatives to funding these needs. That means that we need to look at our taxes if it comes to that. It also means that we are building relationships with foundations both on a national and local level, and that we are advocating for those foundations to see housing as a priority. Oftentimes, historically speaking, housing wasn't a priority. Housing was affordable. It was easy to obtain. Maybe food insecurity was a priority or health was a priority. But without a roof over our heads, None of those can work. So we really need to think about how we advocate to reprioritize housing as our major priority.
Mary, what do you think?
Alex sounds way smarter than me on that topic, so I leave that to Chuck and to Nick. That's but in terms of how any of us can work to mitigate problems going forward, I'm very encouraged by how much advocacy I've seen among my colleagues, my community. It's really great to hear from people who I didn't really think knew what the Housing Council do, and just express their appreciation and just activate folks in engaging with the work. And this has been high-profile news. People are starting to ask questions and get more involved in understanding how their community is run, which I think is a silver lining and a positive. So happy to share more information about how our federal funds are used, how we work to be good stewards. Anybody can reach out to our organization to ask questions about who we are, what we do. We file a 990. We're on the Charities Bureau. I mean, there's a lot of transparency in our organization, and I'm happy to share more information about how we do what we do.
Yeah, and let me also say to Alex, this is a conversation this hour about what these organizations are doing about homelessness. When you bring up possible federal cuts, we've been talking about it all week because we're in the middle of a winter pledge campaign for WXXI. I've been here for 11 years. It's never felt like this. Primarily because there's a couple things that are true at the same time. Number one, if the most draconian, the most extreme federal cuts come, whether it's to organizations that do the kind of work that you all do, whether it's a Corporation for Public Broadcasting, whatever it is, there's probably not just a way to safeguard against that. There's not a way to fully just plan for that and say, well, it didn't matter. It's going to matter. What we are feeling the urgency of is trying to convince anybody who's ever thought about, writing a check, making a phone call, making a pledge, to say, if you were ever thinking about it, now's the time. Now is the time. And I'm sure that is true for Pathstone, and I'm sure that is true for PCHO. That is certainly true for WXXI and NPR and public media. That's the reality. So I would say to Alex, I appreciate the question. I can empathize with the guests who say they are absolutely doing everything they can to plan for it, to not be caught off guard by it. To some degree, there's not really a world that exists where it's like, well, the rug got pulled, but we had a second rug. And the rug's gone, the rug's gone. It doesn't mean everything's gone, but it's going to hurt, and there's going to be a lot of pain. And so sometimes relying on individual generosity or foundations, as you say, now is the time. Alex, thank you for that. Let me get an email from Deb who says, I live in Monroe County. My question is why not change the zoning to make all these empty buildings into living quarters? For example, the old Tops on Ridge Road West. So Deb's wondering, does that happen? Is that an option?
Well, excuse me. Well, we actually did that. And I'll let Nick, because this is Nick's baby, but it's called Cecilia's Place. We took an old abandoned building on Central Park and turned it into a 14-unit building. We started this in 2018, and with multiple funding sources, multiple partners. It sounds like a really, really easy thing to do, but it's very complicated. With this building, we had a historic tax credit, so that had to play into it. And in that then product, it's beautiful, but it took literally 7 years for it to come to fruition. Not that every project will take this long, but that's definitely something on our radar, and we've actually accomplished that. And maybe down the road, but I don't know if you want to add to that, Nick.
Yeah, to take an old building that's not being used, it takes a lot of effort. It requires the city to be okay with where that building is. It will likely be zoned in a certain district or have certain requirements in that zoning that you have to adapt to or change the way you build that, or renovate that property in order for that to be okay. So let's talk about really quickly about what goes into that. The neighborhood has to be okay with it. The city council might need to be okay with it. The zoning board needs to review it. The planning board needs to review it. If it doesn't have enough parking that's currently required under zoning or code, and you're going to put 15 people on a property, but you only have 3 or 4 parking spots. You have to get that okayed so that you can also use street parking, right? So when you're really thinking about taking an old building and going through all that processes, we have to build those costs of doing all that work into the project, which adds more cost to the project. And so that's where the problem lies. When people complain about the cost of a project, remember that the zoning and code dictates some of those costs by requiring some of these rules and putting us through processes that the neighborhood is watching and sometimes stopping in that entire process. Most neighborhoods love the work we do, and they want us to change the community. But there's always those few detractors that are going to come to those meetings, and it can really cost a lot of work, time, money. So
Anything to add, Mary?
Yeah, I'll say that the Housing Council is part of Passstone. We have a real estate development, a very large and successful real estate department program, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I can only echo what Chuck and Nick have said. It is a very obvious solution, but it is a very costly solution. And I love the question, and I would invite you to stay on top of what's happening in your town. Share that feedback you have. If there's a property in your community that you think should have a new life or would be served better by becoming housing, please be vocal and loud and talk about that as often and as in many places as you can, because so many of us with these great ideas are so busy and kept out of the meetings that we need to take our opportunities to share our feedback on developing, because a few voices, detractors, may have good reasons. They may outweigh what the community actually wants. So I love that you're asking, and I think if you have a property in your community you'd like to see turn into housing, express that.
Yeah, Deb, good question. One more question before we take our only break of the hour. A different Alex asked if good cause eviction legislation in Rochester is affecting what our guests are doing there. So that's a story. You want to?
not yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's funny, some of our property managers...
Because it's so new, Nick?
Yeah, because it's so new. It hasn't quite gone through the process. And frankly, the way we do housing first and the way we partner with our landlords, I don't see it impacting us as much as it'll impact private renters. The reason is that our case managers, housing stability coordinators, we call them, are out there partnering with those landlords. And when there's a need for eviction, we're working really closely with the landlord to try to move the person versus end up with an eviction situation. So it's a great relationship to have.
Anything to add there, Jack, Mary?
Yeah, it has affected the Housing Council. We are educators primarily, so we have a hotline. We receive about 4,000 calls a year. We're getting calls from both tenants and landlords asking just to understand it. So you're welcome to call. We have answers to most of your questions. Some things have to still be worked through in the courts. But yes, it is impacting the Housing Council in terms of coming up to speed and being able to provide good, solid information. But over 80% of evictions in the city of Rochester are non-payment. So there's not as many people affected by what had been bad cause evictions previously. So not in practice quite yet, but we are gearing up to be able to be a good educator on the topic.
As we talk about homelessness, the part of what sparked this conversation on this particular day is the fact that there is tomorrow an event with a sold-out screening now of a film called No Address, and it depicts, albeit in a fictional way, really real-life stories that people experience with homelessness all the time. If you are not going tomorrow, we'll come back after this break. I'll ask our guests if they think that there might be ways for you to see this film in the future. I'm sure they would love for you to be thinking about these issues. And we're going to talk a little bit more, take some of your feedback. We're going to talk about what this winter has been like. People have questions about if Code Blue is effective. You might see those signs around town, things like that. We'll talk about Peace Village and a lot more with our guests from the Housing Council at Passstone and Person-Centered Housing Options.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from GreenSpark Solar, serving the greater Rochester and Finger Lakes regions for over 20 years. GreenSpark Solar is dedicated to helping people power their homes and businesses with local solar power and battery storage backup. More at greensparksolar.com.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. So if you don't have a ticket to go see No Address tomorrow, Nick Coulter was kind enough to look up some of the. There's some other screenings. You can still see this film.
Yeah. So it comes in. It comes to theaters on the 28th, nationwide. It will be at AMC Theater. It will be at Tinseltown Cinemark. So check it out on Fandango or whatever website you go to check out movies. I believe there's 4:00 showings throughout the weekend and evening showings as well. So, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the way this winter has sort of played out. And I was just talking to a neighbor of mine recently about how different this winter feels than last winter. This winter, a ton of snow and ice, very, very cold. We kind of feel like we're starting to come out of it a little bit here, but just a lot tougher, I think, than last winter, which was pretty mild. So I'm going to go around the table. I'll start with you, Nick. When people see code blue and you see those signs about temperatures dropping below 32, is it effective? What have you seen with that?
Yeah, code blue is effective. While numbers are rising and shelters have shortage of space, the way we do things really keeps it at the forefront of people's minds when they're on the street. Our outreach team goes out, offers people shelter, tries to get them into code blue. If you're needing to access code blue and you want a ride to a shelter, RTS has the shelters listed at the bus terminal, as well as if you get on the bus and you ask to be taken to a shelter, RTS will provide a free ride. So we've worked really hard with the county. The county has a Code Blue meeting every week to review this process with shelters, with outreach, and our housing programs to make sure that these processes work. Nothing's perfect, but I can tell you that our team has helped people access shelter throughout the process. I just want to mention, though, that this winter has been really, really, really cold and consistently cold.
Yeah.
Open Door reported that there were several people that have been discharged from the hospital due to loss of limbs, and then discharged to Open Door just for their own safety. This is a really brutal winter for the people outside. So if you see somebody that's out there and you have concern for them, tell them about the Code Blue process. You don't have to rustle, but if you see somebody out there, please share with them that they can go to a shelter and how to do it.
I know there's occasionally controversy if the city decides to sweep an encampment or try to encourage people to take the Code Blue offer, and sometimes people don't take that. Do you think the city's handled it well from what you've seen?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think it's been the city has been out there with outreach as much as possible to inform people. Where the city has felt it has been a high risk, I feel as though it's a butt up against the person's rights and the city's ability to try to mitigate death. That's a really challenging place to be in. And frankly, our team has really struggled with it. Each person that's out there has rights and they make choices, and they need to be supported in those so that as we engage them, they can access housing. When their stuff is taken, they are maybe struggle with the location that they're in. It can really set us back. So we try to work really closely with the teams, both the county and the city, to make sure that doesn't happen and that they have access to shelter.
And I've been reading, trying to make sure I understand what's going on with Peace Village, which is the city's only sanctioned homeless encampment on Loomis Street. It was raised in September, I think. And it used to include a collection of sheds, homes to the homeless who were served by different nonprofit outreach workers. Peace Village was often described as a place for those who struggled in the shelter system, sometimes because of active addiction or mental illness or other issues. And so the site gets raised in September, and it's a question of, is it going to come back? City Council President Miguel Melendez has said, quote, "It's something I've expressed to the administration that I don't want to go another winter without this site being figured out," end quote. So I don't know if our guests from PCHO know, is the city restoring the nonprofit status of Peace Village? Will legislation fill in any funding gaps? Do you know anything about what's going on with this?
Yeah, we've worked closely with the city for the last couple of years on this. And, the best way to describe this is it was a heavy lift, or it is a heavy lift. Our community's never tried something like this. The shelters are called pallet shelters, so it's not going to be anything makeshift. They're actually very sturdy. They have heat. They have cooling. It's going to be a structured transitional housing environment. There's been some funding challenges to work through. The hope is that the spring will bring more news on Peace Village. But we are certainly committed to provide support services to Peace Village, and we have. Even though the site was raised and fenced off, there's some folks that were staying outside the fence area that our outreach team continued to outreach to. So hopefully more news to come.
Okay. And, Nick, I know you and your colleagues, sometimes you get to know people pretty well. I mean, sometimes there's familiar faces. You really feel for people who, who maybe are looking for a different kind of solution, or sometimes they're saying, "I want to be here for now." I mean, it's complicated. Every person is different. As you said, they have rights. I don't want to pull in any sort of controversy. I'm just curious to know if you think this one was handled well.
Which one?
The situation with the raising of Peace Village and how it's been handled.
In the past, I wasn't really involved with Loomis Street, so to speak. The raising of Peace Village, when we ended it so that we could begin construction on industrial, I think was handled really well.
Okay.
We partnered with our other organizations to provide shelter to some of the people. Most of the people were housed. And then as we slowly closed down over the course of, I think, 3 to 4 months, we were able to continue to move people across the street while we continued to work with them. Yes, some people did not want to leave Peace Village, and that's okay. But we needed to start construction in order for this project to move forward. We had to bring in RG&E. We had to run lines. We had to begin water work. We had to do put down slabs for the pallets. So all that stuff needed to be done on that property, and we couldn't have people living there. It wouldn't be safe. So our number one is safety in this situation, but also that people get housed. And throughout that process, it worked really well.
All right, let me grab a phone call from Jerry. Go ahead, Jerry.
Oh, hi there. I didn't know I was going to be on live. So I'm calling about the Good Cause bill. My understanding is that it's being passed, or it's in the works. It's not official, but we were successful in finally getting it to cover Rochester. However, my understanding also is that it's not going to cover folks who live in the suburbs or in the towns, if you will. And if that's accurate, I'm just wondering, what would it take for people who do live in the suburbs and the towns to be covered or protected by the Good Cause bill?
Jerry, it's a good question. I mean, my first understanding, maybe Mary can correct me, is, I think it's up to each individual municipality. And so we've seen different municipalities around the state pursue Good Cause and others not. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep. So the city of Rochester had opted into it. Your municipality, so whoever you would go to eviction court for, whatever that entity is, would have to pass that as well.
So I guess what it comes down to, Jerry, is wherever you live, if you don't have it and you want it, probably start lobbying. Start talking to your lawmakers and see where they are. Fair enough?
Yep.
Okay.
That would be my advice.
Yep. So that's and again, Jerry, other municipalities in different parts of the state sort of have their own flavors of it. There's a lot more you can read up on it. Well, what Rochester's doing, it might not look exactly the same elsewhere, but I would talk to your lawmakers about that. So Tess wants to know, said I missed part of the show, but wanted to know if these organizations have provisions for people who have animals, because Tess is saying people's pets are often a big part of what their decision making is, and yeah, I mean, absolutely, pets are family members. There, you're nodding over there, guys. Yeah,
That's a great question. I have 2 dogs myself. But no, actually, on different levels. So our outreach team definitely encounters folks that have pets, and folks that are living in cars or on the street, and are reluctant to go into a shelter or to housing in general because of their pets. So we work with Lollipop Farm. Actually, one of our staff person belongs to a not-for-profit that provides short-term sheltering for animals. So we definitely use that as a priority, or have that as a priority. And then when folks that are housed, we certainly try to advocate for them as much as possible, because we do understand that's part of their family. And that's kind of looking at the person holistically, not just, as a person in front of you.
fair enough. Yeah, I think that's well said. Anything you want to add over there, Mary?
No, I'd also just let people know that we have a lot of great FAQ and tenants' rights information, and there is the information, the definitions between a service animal, an emotional support animal, and a pet. And so understanding your rights and what category your family member falls into would be helpful in your housing search.
Tess, thank you. Before we lose the hour, I want to close with this and give all 3 guests a chance to talk a little bit about their perspective on maybe what the average person maybe gets wrong, either about homelessness or about housing options. And that comes in a lot of different directions. Sometimes there's assumptions about what it means to be homeless, or why people are homeless, or how they could end up in a different situation, what is available, what is not. Sometimes it's just knowing what housing supports are available for people who might be in a low-income category but would like to find a different place, a place at all, and don't know, is there local support, is there state support, is there federal support? Sometimes we get questions via email about vouchers and programs like that. So what is it that you want to make sure that listeners understand about what you do, and maybe what would you want to dispel or clear up any confusion about? I'll start with Mary.
Great question. So the Housing Council serves the entire spectrum of people using the housing system, from people who may be experiencing homelessness all the way to housing providers. We have people from very large property management companies calling us on our hotline to access this information. So I'd say the number one problem I see, or where tension exists, is where people generalize their personal experience as the community's experience, or the facts of the situation for the community, broadly speaking. So I would say if you have a housing concern, or you're facing a housing challenge, approach resources with curiosity and an open mind so you can get accurate information. And we make assumptions about people on the other side, whether it is your housing provider or your tenant that you're frustrated with, and that we as service providers are very protective about people's privacy. And so we can't always disclose a full situation to give people every nuance of everyone's situation. So what happens to your neighbor you might not fully understand all the dynamics. When someone's housing is in jeopardy, there's a lot of things happening in their lives. So every situation is complex, and that's why I'm so dedicated to the mission of PCHO and the Housing Council for creating individualized service plans for people that take all those things into effect. So I'd say do your research. Please visit our website or reach out to us to understand rights and responsibilities and the truth of real estate law. Explore your options, and what's going to solve one person's housing crisis is not going to be a great solution for somebody else you know. So I'd say avoid generalizations.
And what's the PCHO answer on this question?
if I don't get in now, I'll never talk because Nick will talk. I'm just kidding. I'm just
It's
kidding.
true. It's
Just
very
kidding.
true. He knows that. We've been together for so
Chuck,
long.
I'll give you 30 seconds. Nick gets the rest.
Okay, so that's fine. No, I guess the most important thing from my perspective is that for folks to try to appreciate that there's always an underlying trauma that has been experienced by the person, whatever that is. And through maybe not the most healthy coping mechanisms, they might have led them down to the path that they're at. And, when Nick and I started PCHO, we wanted to make sure that we, as well as our staff, we looked at the person as a person and just treat them like that. I mean, they're not a scary person. Just approach them and respectfully and treat them like a human being. So,
Nick?
Yeah, Chuck said it great. When someone is about to experience homelessness, that they have the resources and that they know where to go. It's in our name, options, and we want them to be person-centered. So that means that, we, with all of our effort and with all of our relationships throughout the community, that we reduce the time that somebody experiences homelessness. Because if we can reduce the time that they're experiencing that, we can reduce the trauma that they're experiencing. Like the movie shows, No Address depicts people who are experiencing domestic violence, are being beaten up on the streets, that are being taken advantage of, that are kicked out of their homes, that are struggling with addiction, and all of these different kinds of people just need a place to live and the opportunities to work with professionals to stay in their homes. If we can reduce the time that they experience that, we can reduce trauma overall in our communities. So that's really what we do. That's what's important to us, and that's why it's so important for us to share.
Listeners, I hope you already have tickets to the sold-out screening of No Address tomorrow at 5 o'clock. The event starts at 5 o'clock. But as Nick mentioned, that is a film that you can see in a number of different screenings around town if you want to not only take in a film, but learn a little bit more about the issue of homelessness. I am grateful for the time from our guests this hour. Nick Coulter and Chuck Albany is joining us from PCHO. That's Person-Centered Housing Options. Gentlemen, thank you for making time for the program today.
Of course.
Mary Leo, Executive Director of the Housing Council at Pathstone. Thank you for your expertise as well.
Thank you.
Here.
Appreciate it.
And from all of us, thank you, listeners. It is day 3 of our winter membership campaign. I hope you're already a member of your public media. And if not, you know where to find us, wxxi.org/give. Have a wonderful day. We will talk to you tomorrow on member-supported public media.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.